Imagine a queen so powerful that her bloodline gave birth to the most dominant dynasty in European history. Imagine a woman born to rule, yet trapped in a prison of betrayal, manipulation, and the cruel label of madness that history still attaches to her name. This is not a fairy tale. It is the haunting true story of Joanna of Castile, the woman the world remembers as Juana la Loca, Joanna the Mad. But was she truly insane, or was her tragedy the result of politics, power, and love gone wrong? Stay with me, because once you hear her story, you'll never forget it. Before we dive deep into the life of this remarkable and misunderstood queen, make sure you subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our powerful historical stories. And after listening, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Was Joanna truly mad, or was she the victim of a ruthless conspiracy? Your voice matters, and I'd love to read your perspective. Joanna of Castile was born on November 6, 1479, in the city of Toledo, Spain. She was the daughter of two of the most famous monarchs in European history, Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon. Together, Isabella and Ferdinand were known as the Catholic monarchs, a powerful pair who united Spain and launched it into its golden age. From birth, Joanna was destined to be part of a great dynastic plan, yet no one imagined she would one day inherit the entire kingdom. Her childhood was one of strict discipline and religious devotion. Isabella, her mother, was a woman of deep faith and rigid character, determined to raise her children with absolute obedience to God and duty to the crown. Joanna was taught Latin, philosophy, and theology, along with music and courtly etiquette. Unlike many royal daughters of her time, she was given a strong intellectual education. She could debate religious doctrine, translate classical texts, and play musical instruments with skill. She was, by all accounts, brilliant. But brilliance could be dangerous in a world that expected queens to be silent, obedient wives. From an early age, Joanna displayed a restless spirit. She questioned dogma, doubted strict religious rituals, and sometimes showed signs of melancholy. Today, historians debate whether she may have suffered from depression, anxiety, or another mental health condition. But in her time, such behavior was seen as dangerous, especially for a princess who would one day be married off to secure political alliances. As a young woman, Joanna was known for her striking beauty, tall, graceful, with auburn hair and deep, expressive eyes that seemed to burn with emotion. Her beauty made her valuable on the marriage market. For her parents, she was a pawn in the chessboard of European politics. And so, at the age of 16, Joanna's life was forever changed. She was betrothed to Philip the Handsome, Archduke of Austria, the son of Maximilian I, Holy Roman Emperor. The marriage would link Spain to the powerful Habsburg dynasty, ensuring that Joanna's children would inherit empires stretching across Europe. When Joanna first met Philip in 1496, the attraction between them was immediate and overwhelming. Philip, known for his extraordinary looks, had earned the nickname the Handsome across Europe. He was charming, charismatic, and admired by many. Joanna fell deeply in love with him almost instantly. Their marriage, though arranged, was one of passion, at least in the beginning. But passion is a double-edged sword. What began with fiery devotion soon turned into jealousy, obsession, and despair. Philip was not a faithful husband. Despite Joanna's devotion, he pursued mistresses openly, ignoring her pleas and humiliating her in court. Joanna, fiercely in love and deeply wounded by betrayal, reacted with intense jealousy. At times she wept uncontrollably. At others, she erupted in fits of anger. She clung to him desperately, unwilling to let go of the love she felt was slipping away. Historians today argue that Joanna was not insane, but rather a young woman destroyed by the cruelty of a philandering husband and the immense pressure of royal life. Yet her enemies found it convenient to whisper that she was mad. Her struggles only grew when tragedy struck her family. One by one, her siblings died, leaving Joanna as the unexpected heir to the thrones of Castile and Aragon. This was never meant to happen. As the third child, she was not raised to rule. But fate had other plans. In 1504, her mother, Isabella of Castile, died, leaving Joanna as Queen of Castile. Philip, seeing an opportunity for power, rushed to claim authority as king consort. But Ferdinand, Joanna's father, resisted, unwilling to let Philip control Castile. A fierce struggle for power broke out, with Joanna caught in the middle, torn between loyalty to her father and love for her husband. Philip's ambition knew no limits. He sought to sideline Joanna, portraying her as mentally unstable and unfit to rule. Courtiers began spreading stories of her supposed madness, her uncontrollable jealousy, her weeping fits, her refusal to eat or sleep when Philip ignored her. Some accounts say she would scream, tear her hair, and chase after her husband's mistresses in wild rages. Whether exaggerated or not, these stories cemented the image of Juana la Loca. In 1506, Philip suddenly died at the age of 28, possibly of typhoid fever. Joanna's grief was overwhelming. She clung to his coffin, refusing to let him be buried, insisting he remain close to her. For months, she traveled across Castile with his body, unable to accept his death. Was this madness, or the unbearable grief of a young woman whose world had collapsed? The line between sorrow and insanity blurred, and her enemies used it to their advantage. With Philip gone, her father Ferdinand returned to power as regent. But even he had little interest in letting Joanna rule. For Ferdinand, keeping his daughter sidelined allowed him to maintain control. And so, the label of madness became permanent. Joanna was declared unfit to govern and placed under guard. In 1509, she was confined to the royal convent of Santa Clara in Tordesillas, along with her young daughter, Catherine. For the rest of her life, nearly 46 years, Joanna would remain a prisoner, isolated from the outside world. She was queen in name only, her power stripped away, her voice silenced. Her son, Charles V, would inherit the Spanish throne and the vast Habsburg Empire, becoming one of the most powerful rulers in history. But his rise came at the cost of his mother's freedom. In Tordesillas, Joanna's life was marked by neglect and sorrow. She was denied contact with most of her children, deprived of sunlight, and treated as a dangerous prisoner rather than a queen. Reports from her keepers described her as melancholic, sometimes refusing to eat, sometimes praying for hours. Yet there were also accounts that she remained lucid, intelligent, and aware of her situation. Some believed she was never mad at all, merely a victim of political convenience. Joanna of Castile died on April 12, 1555, at the age of 75. She had been queen for over half a century, yet she had never truly ruled. Her legacy remains one of history's greatest tragedies, a brilliant, passionate woman reduced to the cruel title of the Mad. But perhaps her true madness was nothing more than a refusal to accept betrayal, loss, and the relentless greed of those around her. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next chapter of history's Forgotten Queens. And I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Do you think Joanna was truly insane, or was she the victim of political manipulation? Your thoughts might reveal just how much of history we've misunderstood. When Philip the Handsome died suddenly in 1506, Joanna's world collapsed. She was 26 years old, a young queen, a grieving widow, and a mother of 6 children. Her overwhelming sorrow became legendary. She clung to Philip's coffin, refusing to bury him, demanding that his body remain close to her at all times. For months, she traveled across Castile with his corpse, halting in monasteries at night, praying beside the coffin, and insisting that no other woman should ever look upon his face. Some chroniclers claimed she opened the coffin just to gaze at him again, though modern historians believe those tales were exaggerated by her political enemies. Grief-stricken or not, Joanna was now the sole ruler of Castile. But power was never truly hers to hold. Her father, Ferdinand of Aragon, saw an opportunity to regain control of Castile after Isabella's death. He argued that Joanna was too unstable to rule, pointing to her obsessive mourning and her unpredictable emotions. Courtiers who wanted to side with Ferdinand spread rumors of her madness. They whispered that she refused to bathe, that she neglected her duties, that she screamed uncontrollably or fell into long silences. In truth, Joanna was isolated, heartbroken, and surrounded by men who had everything to gain from declaring her unfit. In 1509, Ferdinand made a decisive move. Joanna was taken to the royal convent of Santa Clara at Tordesillas, a fortress-like convent in northern Spain. Though she was queen in name, she became a prisoner in reality. Her youngest daughter, Catherine, just a child at the time, was locked away with her, both mother and daughter confined for years within cold stone walls. The convent became Joanna's cage. She was guarded day and night, her visitors restricted, her freedom denied. Reports say her chambers were dark, with narrow windows that let in little light. She was not permitted to walk freely in the gardens or interact with the outside world. Even letters were censored, preventing her from communicating openly with her children or allies. Ferdinand justified this imprisonment as necessary for the kingdom's stability. To him, Joanna was both a political threat and a convenient shield. As long as she remained locked away, he could rule Castile in her name without opposition. But Ferdinand was not the only man to profit from her silencing. When Ferdinand died in 1516, power shifted to Joanna's son, Charles, later known as Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor. Charles inherited not only Spain but also the Habsburg Empire, becoming one of the most powerful rulers in European history. Yet even Charles had no interest in freeing his mother. Her existence was politically inconvenient. If she were allowed to rule, factions could rally around her, challenging his authority. And so, like his grandfather before him, Charles declared her incapable and kept her locked in Tordesillas. Imagine the cruelty. A mother shut away while her children rose to power across Europe. Joanna's daughter Eleanor became Queen of Portugal and later Queen of France. Her daughter Isabella married Christian II of Denmark. Her daughter Mary became Queen of Hungary. Her youngest, Catherine, who had been imprisoned alongside her, eventually married King John III of Portugal. And most famously, her son Charles ruled the greatest empire of the age, stretching across Europe and into the Americas. Each child played a role on the world stage, but Joanna, who had given birth to them all, was erased. Life inside Tordesillas grew harsher with time. Some accounts describe guards treating her with cruelty, mocking her, and leaving her in near solitude. Her health began to decline. Chroniclers claimed she often sat in silence for hours, lost in thought, or whispered prayers into the night. At times she resisted, refusing food, refusing to bathe, or lashing out at her jailers. Was this madness, or the natural reaction of a woman unjustly imprisoned for decades? One story, passed down through generations, describes how Joanna would stand at the convent window, looking out at the world she could not touch. Villagers who passed by sometimes caught glimpses of her, thin and pale, her hair streaked with gray, her eyes still fierce. To them, she was both a queen and a ghost, alive but absent from her kingdom. Charles V rarely visited his mother. When he did, he treated her more like a political burden than a parent. He gave strict orders that she remain guarded and that no one treat her as a ruling monarch. To him, Joanna was useful only as a symbol, a queen in name whose silence allowed him to govern without challenge. For nearly 46 years, Joanna endured this captivity. She lived through the rise of the Spanish Empire, the voyages of conquest in the New World, and the glory of her son's reign, all from behind convent walls. Her name was spoken across Europe, but her voice was never heard. And yet, despite the silence, there were glimmers of strength. Reports suggest that Joanna never signed documents surrendering her royal title. She never abdicated, never agreed that she was unfit. Even in confinement, she remained Queen of Castile, at least on parchment. This quiet defiance may have been her only weapon, but it ensured that her name could not be erased entirely. By the early 1550s, Joanna was an old woman, frail and suffering from ill health. She could no longer walk without pain, and years of isolation had taken their toll. Her once auburn hair had turned white, her face lined with sorrow. She prayed often, clinging to faith as her only comfort. Finally, on April 12, 1555, Joanna of Castile died in Tordesillas at the age of 75. She had been queen for more than half a century, but ruled for almost none of it. Her death passed quietly, overshadowed by the power and ambition of her son, Charles V. She was buried beside her beloved Philip in Granada, fulfilling her wish to remain close to him even in death. History gave her the name Joanna the Mad, but perhaps that was the greatest injustice of all. Was she truly insane, or was she a brilliant, passionate woman destroyed by betrayal, grief, and politics? Many modern historians argue the latter. Her so-called madness may have been nothing more than sorrow, depression, and resistance against those who sought to use her. What remains certain is this: Joanna was one of the most tragic queens in history. Born to greatness, she was reduced to silence. A woman of intelligence and passion, she became a prisoner of men who feared her power. And though centuries have passed, her story still whispers a warning that sometimes the line between madness and injustice is drawn not by truth, but by those in power. Before we dive into the closing part of this heartbreaking story, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss our deep historical explorations. And after you hear this final part, leave a comment below. Was Joanna truly a victim of her emotions, or a victim of history itself? Your voice will help keep her memory alive. When Joanna of Castile died in 1555, she left behind a kingdom transformed. Her son, Charles V, ruled an empire where the sun never set, spanning Spain, the Netherlands, much of Italy, Austria, and the newly conquered territories of the Americas. To the world, Charles was the powerful monarch of the Habsburg dynasty. But behind his glory was the silent suffering of the mother he kept imprisoned for nearly half a century. After her death, Joanna's story became shrouded in legend. Chroniclers of the 16th and 17th centuries were quick to embrace the image of a queen driven insane by grief and passion. They described her obsessive mourning for Philip the Handsome, her refusal to bury his body, her jealous rages, and her supposed descent into madness. The image of Juana la Loca became fixed in popular imagination, a tragic woman who let love destroy her reason. But these accounts were written by men in power, often serving the interests of the Habsburg dynasty. For Charles and his supporters, portraying his mother as insane justified his rule. If Joanna had been of sound mind, her claim to the throne would have been undeniable. If she were mad, however, it made sense for Charles to govern in her place. Madness, therefore, became not just a description of her state of mind, but a political tool. Throughout the centuries, the tale of Joanna the Mad was repeated endlessly. Poets, dramatists, and painters drew inspiration from her tragic story. She became a romantic figure, a queen undone by her own emotions. Paintings depicted her traveling with Philip's coffin, pale and grief-stricken, candles flickering in the night. Writers emphasized her obsessive love, her jealousy, and her sorrow. To them, she was less a queen and more a symbol of passion turned destructive. But was this image true? Modern historians argue otherwise. Evidence suggests Joanna was intelligent, highly educated, and politically aware. She was fluent in Latin and well-versed in philosophy and theology. She corresponded with scholars and diplomats. Far from being a simple victim of emotion, she was capable of reason and leadership. Her so-called madness, many now believe, was exaggerated or even fabricated by those who sought to control her. Consider the context. Joanna lived in an era when women rulers were rare and often distrusted. Strong, independent queens were seen as threats. By labeling her as unstable, male rulers could strip her of authority without open rebellion. Her father Ferdinand had every reason to call her unfit. He wished to retain power in Castile. Her husband Philip used rumors of her instability to push her aside and rule in her name. And later, her son Charles relied on the same justification to keep her confined. At every stage, men around her found her madness convenient. There is also the question of her grief. Joanna's obsessive mourning for Philip is often cited as proof of insanity. But grief is not madness. Imagine a young woman, deeply in love, suddenly widowed at 26, betrayed repeatedly by her husband in life, then stripped of power after his death. Is it any wonder she clung to his coffin, refusing to let go? Her actions, though extreme, can be understood as human sorrow, not insanity. Furthermore, accounts of her behavior in Tordesillas suggest she retained lucidity. Visitors who met her described her as intelligent and coherent, though melancholic. Some letters attributed to her show clear reasoning and awareness of political affairs. Even in captivity, she never signed documents relinquishing her rights as queen. That stubborn refusal may have been her final act of resistance. As centuries passed, however, the legend of Juana la Loca grew stronger than the truth. Her image as a mad queen appeared in plays, novels, and later, films. Spanish painters of the 19th century, such as Francisco Pradilla, immortalized her in haunting canvases, most famously in Donna Juana la Loca, showing her standing beside Philip's coffin, surrounded by courtiers, her eyes hollow with grief. To this day, that painting defines her image for many who know little of her life. But in the 20th and 21st centuries, scholars began to challenge the myth. Feminist historians, in particular, argued that Joanna's story reflected the way powerful women were silenced. They pointed out the double standards. Male rulers could rage, grieve, or act irrationally without being branded insane, but a woman showing passion was immediately labeled unstable. Joanna's confinement, they argued, was not proof of madness, but proof of how dangerous a female monarch was to the men around her. Psychologists have also revisited her case. Some suggest Joanna may have suffered from depression or anxiety, conditions poorly understood in her time. Others believe she endured episodes of postpartum depression, having borne 6 children in quick succession. These struggles could have been magnified by stress, grief, and isolation. But none of this equates to madness in the sense her enemies claimed. If anything, it reveals her as a deeply human figure, vulnerable yet strong in her refusal to surrender her crown. Her legacy is also seen in the dynasty she created. Through Joanna, the crowns of Castile and Aragon passed into the Habsburg line. Her son Charles V and her grandson Philip II shaped the destiny of Europe for centuries. The Spanish Empire's golden age, with its wealth from the New World and its dominance in Europe, was possible because of Joanna's inheritance. She was the bridge between 2 dynasties, the Trastamaras of Spain and the Habsburgs of Austria. Yet in this triumph, her own voice was silenced. It is one of history's great ironies. The woman who gave Europe its most powerful dynasty was erased from power by the very family she created. Without Joanna, there would be no Charles V, no Philip II, no Spanish Empire. And yet, she lived and died in captivity, remembered not as a founder of dynasties, but as a prisoner queen. Today, many in Spain and beyond are re-evaluating her story. Historians now ask, should we continue to call her the Mad, or should we rename her the Forgotten, or even the Wronged? Some suggest her true title should be Joanna the Betrayed. Others see her as a symbol of resilience, a queen who, despite decades of isolation, never officially surrendered her crown. Her story also carries lessons for today. It reminds us how history can be shaped by those in power, how narratives of madness and instability are often used to silence inconvenient voices. It forces us to ask, how many other women in history were dismissed as unstable when, in truth, they were resisting injustice? Joanna's life is more than a tragic tale. It is a mirror reflecting the struggles of countless women across centuries. Women whose power threatened men, whose grief was dismissed as weakness, whose voices were silenced by labels they did not deserve. In remembering her not as the Mad, but as Joanna of Castile, the rightful queen, we restore a piece of justice long denied. When we walk through the halls of Spanish history, we see kings celebrated in grand portraits, generals remembered for their victories, explorers praised for their discoveries. But in the quiet convent of Tordesillas, a queen sat forgotten for nearly 50 years. She was not celebrated, not honored, not free. And yet, her bloodline changed the course of Europe forever. That is the paradox of Joanna of Castile. Her legacy lives on, not only in the dynasty she created, but in the questions she forces us to ask. Who writes history? Who decides who is mad and who is sane? Who benefits from silencing a queen? Before we close this epic series, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss more untold histories. And when you finish listening, I want you to leave a comment below. Do you believe Joanna was truly insane, or was she silenced by history's cruelest conspiracy? Your thoughts will help rewrite how the world remembers her. Joanna of Castile spent nearly her entire adulthood in confinement. After the death of her beloved husband Philip the Handsome in 1506, she was reduced to a shadow of her former self, not by madness, but by the relentless control of those around her. Her father Ferdinand locked her away to preserve his own power. Her son Charles V, one of the greatest emperors in history, continued that imprisonment for almost half a century. By the time Joanna reached old age, she had become a ghost within her own kingdom. The once brilliant princess who debated theology and played music in royal halls now lived in a small, dimly lit chamber at the convent of Santa Clara in Tordesillas. Guards monitored her constantly. Servants treated her with suspicion, sometimes cruelty. Letters were censored, and her voice was rarely heard beyond those convent walls. Yet even in this silence, Joanna never surrendered her crown. She never signed away her rights as Queen of Castile. For her, being queen was not simply a title. It was her birthright, the one thing she could cling to as the men around her stole her freedom. This quiet defiance made her imprisonment even more tragic. She remained a monarch in name, but her kingdom was ruled by others. Visitors who encountered Joanna in her later years often left with conflicting impressions. Some described her as withdrawn, melancholic, and broken by years of isolation. Others, however, spoke of moments of clarity, when she spoke with intelligence, remembered details of politics, or expressed her faith in God with calm dignity. Was this the mind of a madwoman, or of a queen crushed by grief and betrayal? The truth, perhaps, lies somewhere in between. Her relationship with her son, Charles V, remained complicated until the end. Charles visited her rarely, treating her more as a political liability than a mother. He ordered her confinement to continue, instructing guards to ensure she could not become a figurehead for rebellion. He knew that if factions of nobles rallied behind her, his authority might be challenged. To Charles, Joanna's silence was the foundation of his empire. But to Joanna, Charles was not just an emperor. He was her child. Imagine the pain of watching your son rise to unimaginable power while you remained locked away, unable to even speak to him freely. She had given birth to the dynasty that ruled Europe, yet she herself had no part in its glory. Her daughters became queens of Portugal, France, Hungary, and Denmark. Her son ruled the Holy Roman Empire and Spain. Joanna, the mother of monarchs, was denied even the dignity of ruling her own life. As her health declined in the 1540s and 1550s, Joanna endured constant physical pain. Her legs swelled with rheumatism, leaving her unable to walk. Her body weakened, but her will to cling to her royal identity never faded. Reports suggest that even when bedridden, she insisted on being addressed as queen. She may have been confined, but she never let the world, or herself, forget who she truly was. On April 12, 1555, at the age of 75, Joanna of Castile finally died in Tordesillas. Her passing was quiet, almost unnoticed by the wider world. The queen who had once been the central figure of Spain's future now slipped away in obscurity. Her body was laid to rest in Granada, beside her husband Philip, fulfilling the wish she had carried since his death nearly 50 years earlier. Even in death, she remained bound to him. And so ended the life of a queen who never truly ruled. A woman who was stripped of her voice, her freedom, and her dignity, yet who lived longer than almost all her contemporaries. She outlasted her father Ferdinand, her husband Philip, and even saw the twilight of her son Charles's reign. She was, in the truest sense, the last queen standing. But what of her legacy? For centuries, history remembered her as Juana la Loca, the Mad Queen of Castile. This label overshadowed her intelligence, her education, and her humanity. It turned her into a tragic figure of obsession and insanity, rather than the political prisoner she truly was. Artists and writers perpetuated the myth, painting her as a woman undone by passion and grief. Romantic as these depictions were, they stripped her of agency. Modern historians, however, have begun to challenge this image. They argue that Joanna's supposed madness was a convenient political weapon. Her father, her husband, and her son all benefited from portraying her as insane. In reality, she may have suffered from depression, anxiety, or grief, conditions very different from madness. Her confinement was less about her mind and more about silencing her voice. Through this lens, Joanna becomes not a mad queen, but a wronged one. She represents the countless women in history who were dismissed, silenced, or labeled unstable simply because they threatened the power of men. Her story forces us to question the narratives we inherit, to ask, how many other figures were erased by lies? Joanna's tragedy also reminds us of the cost of empire. The golden age of Spain, the glory of Charles V, the expansion of the Habsburg dynasty, all were built upon her inheritance. She was the key that unlocked the union of Castile and Aragon with the Habsburgs, creating a global empire. Without Joanna, there would have been no Charles V, no Philip II, no Spanish dominance in the 16th century. Yet the woman who made it possible was locked away, forgotten in the very empire she had helped to create. In recent years, her story has been retold with greater sympathy. Plays, novels, and films have explored her life from new perspectives. Historians and writers now present her not as the mad, but as a woman ahead of her time, intelligent, educated, and tragic. The myth of her insanity is slowly being dismantled, replaced with a recognition of her humanity. Perhaps the final word on Joanna should not be madness, but resilience. She endured betrayal by her husband, manipulation by her father, and abandonment by her son. She endured isolation, cruelty, and neglect,